This is the story of Emma Goldman. Emma Goldman, Orthodox Jewish family, lived in the Lutheran city of Kaunas. Goldman's mother, T.U.B. Benowich, was married before to a man whom she had two daughters with, Helen in 1860 and Lena in 1862. When her first husband died, she was devastated. Goldman later wrote, "Whatever love she had died when the young man who she has married at age 15. Tubby's second marriage was arranged by her family and, as Goldman put it, made from the first. Her second husband, Abraham Goldman, invested Tubby's inheritance in a business that quickly failed, and the ensuing hardship combined with an emotional distance of husband and wife to make a household a tense place for children. When Tubby became pregnant, Abraham hoped desperately for a son. A daughter, he believed, would serve as one more mark of failure. They eventually had two sons, but the first child was Emma. Emma was born in June 27, 1869. Her father used violence to punish his children, beating them when they disobeyed him. He used a whip only on Emma, the most rebellious of them. Her mother prevented scarce comfort, calling only rarely on Abraham to tone down his beatings. Goldman later speculated that her father's fury temper was a least partially a result of sexual frustration. Goldman's relationship with her elder half-sisters, Helen and Lena, was a study in contrasts. Helen, the oldest, provided the comfort they lacked from their mother. She filled Goldman's childhood with whatever hope it had. Lena, however, was distant and uncharitable. The three sisters were joined by brother Louis, who died at age 6, Herman, born in 1872, and Mercy, born in 1879. When Emma was a young girl, the Goldman family moved to a village of Peppo, where her father ran an inn. While her sisters worked, she became friends with a servant who excited her. The first erotic situation. Later in Pablo, she witnessed a patient being whipped with a knout in the street. This event traumatized her and contributed to her lifelong distaste of violent authority. At the age of 7, Goldman moved with her family to the Prussian city of Königsberg, and she enrolled in a Realschule. One teacher punished disorderly students, targeting Goldman in particular by beating her hands with a ruler. Another teacher tried to molest his female students and was fired when Goldman fought back. She found a sympathetic mentor in her German teacher, who lended her books and even took her to the opera. A passionate student, Goldman passed the exam for admissions in a gymnasium, but her religious teacher refused to provide a certificate for good behavior, and she was unable to attend. The family moved to Russia city of St. Petersburg, where her father opened one unsuccessful store after another. Their property forced the kids to work, and Goldman took a assortment of jobs, including one in a corset job. As a teenager, Goldman begged her father to allow her to return to school, but instead he threw her French books into the fire and shouted, "Girls did not have to learn much. All Jewish girls need to know is how to prepare gefilte fish, cut noodles fine, and give the men plenty of children." Goldman pursued an independent education of her own. However, as soon began to study the political turmoil around her, particularly the nihilists responsible for assassinating Alexander II of Russia. The ensued turmoil intrigued Goldman, even though she did not fully understand it at the time. When she read What is to be done, 1863, she found a role model in the protagonist Vera, who abandoned a nihilist philosophy and escaped her repressive family to live freely and organize a swinging cooperative. The book enthralled Goldman and remained a source of inspiration throughout her life. Her father, meanwhile, continued to insist on a doomsday future for her, and he tried to arrange for her to be married at the age of 15. They fought about this issue constantly. He complained that she was becoming a loose woman, and she insisted that she would marry only for love. At the corset shop, she was forced to fend off unwanted advantages from Russian officers and other men. One persistent suitor took her to a hotel and committed what Goldman called violent contact. Two biographies called it rape. She was stunned by the experience, overcome by shock and the discovery that the contact between man and woman could be so brutal and painful. Goldman felt that the encounter forever scarred her interactions with men. In 1885, Helen planned to move to New York to join her sister Lena and her husband. Goldman wanted to join her sister, but their father refused to allow it. Despair, Helen offered to pay her for the trip. Abraham turned a dumb eye to her plea. Desperate, Goldman threatened to throw herself into the Neva River if she could not go. He finally accepted, and on December 29, 1885, Helen and Emma appeared at New York's Castle Ground. They moved into the register home Helen had made with her husband Samuel. Fleeing the rising anti-Semitism of St. Petersburg, her parents and brother joined them a year later. Goldman began working as a seamstress, sewing overcoats for more than 10 hours a day, earning $2 and $2.50 a week. She asked for a raise but was denied. She quit and took work at a small shop nearby. At her new job, she met a fellow worker named Jacob, who shared her love of books, dancing, and traveling, as well as her frustration with the monotony of factory work. After 4 months, they got married in February 1887. Once they moved in with Goldman's family, however, their relationship flustered. On their wedding day, she discovered that he was impotent. They became emotionally and physically distant. Before long, he became jealous and suspicious. She, meanwhile, was beginning more engaged with the political turmoil around her, particularly the fallout of the 1886 Haymarket affair in Chicago, as the anti-authoritarian political philosophy of anarchism. Less than a year after the wedding, they were divorced. He begged her to return and threatened to poison himself if she didn't. They reunited, but after 3 months she left once again. To her parents, considered her behavior loose and refused to allow Goldman into their house. Carrying her sewing machine in one hand and a bag with $5 in the other, she left Rochester and headed southeast to New York City. On her first day in the city, Goldman met two men who would forever change her life. At Sash's Cafe, a gathering place for radicals, was introduced to Alexander Bertman, an anarchist who invited her to a public speech that evening. They went to hear Johann Muss, editor of a radical publication called Hit, and an advocate of propaganda of the deed, or propaganda of the deed, the use of violence to propagate change. She was impressed by her fury oration, and he told her under his wing, trained her in the methods of public speaking, and encouraged her gradually, telling her that she would to take my place when I am gone. One of the first public talks in support of the cause was in Rochester. After convincing Helen not to tell her parents of her speech, Goldman felt her mind a blank once on the stage. Suddenly, something strange happened. In a flash I saw it. Every incident of my 3 years in Rochester the Gerson factory, its drudgery and humiliation, the failure of my marriage, the Chicago crimes. I began to speak. The words I have never heard myself utter before and came pouring forth, faster and faster. They came with passionate intention. Instantly, the audience has vanished. The hall itself has disappeared. I was conscious only of my own words, of my ecstatic song. Enchanted by the experience, she refined her public persona during subsequent engagement. Quickly, however, she found herself arguing with most other her in over her independence. After a momentous speech in Cleveland, she felt as though she has been a parrot repeating most views, and resolved the impression herself on stage. Upon returning to New York, most becoming furious and told her, "Who is not with me is against me." She left Freeheat and joined with another publishing Die Autonomy. Meanwhile, she began a friendship with Berkman, who she affectionately called Sasha. Before long, they both became lovers and moved into a communal apartment with his cousin Modus Steen and Goldman's friend Helen Mencken in rural Woodstock, Illinois. Although their relationship had numerous difficulties, Goldman and Berkman would share a close bond of for decades, united by their anarchist principles and commitment to personal equality. In 1892, Goldman joined with Berkman and Steen in opening an ice cream shop in Worcester, Massachusetts. After only a few months of operating the shop, however, Goldman and Berkman were deflected from the venture by their involvement in the Homestead strike. One of the first political movements that brought Berkman and Goldman together was the Homestead strike. In June 1892, a steel plant in Homestead, Pennsylvania, owned by Andrew Carnegie, became the focus of national attention when talks between his company and another iron and steel workers, A.A. broke down. The factory manager was Henry Clay Frick, a fierce opponent of the Union. When a final round of talk failed and ended of June, management closed the plant and locking out the workers, who immediately went on strike. Strike breakers were brought in and the company hired Pinkerton guards to protect them. On July 6, a fight broke out between 300 Pinkerton guards and a crowd of armed Union workers. During the 12-hour gunfight, 7 guards and 9 strikers were killed. When a majority of the nation's newspaper came out in support of the strikers, Goldman and Berkman resolved an assassinate Frank, an action they expected would inspire the workers to revolt against the communist system. Berkman chose to carry out the assassination and ordered Goldman to stay behind in order to explain his motives after he was to jail. He would be in charge of the deed, she of the word. Bertman tried and failed to make a bomb, then set out for Pittsburgh to buy a gun and a suit of decent clothing. Goldman, meanwhile, decided to help fund the system through prostitution. Remembering the character of Sonia in the novel Crime and Punishment, she mused. She had became a prostitute in order to support her young brother and sister. Sensitive Sonia could sell her body. Why not I? Once on the street, she caught the eye of a man who took her into a saloon, brought her a beer, gave her $10, informed her she did not have the knack, and told her to quit the business. She was too astounded to speak. She wrote to Helena, claiming ill, and asked her for $15. On July 23, Bertman gained access to Frank's orders with a concealed handgun and shot Frank 3 times and stabbed him in the leg. A group of workers, far from joining in his attended beat Bertman unconscious, and he was carried out by policemen. Bertman was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 22 years in prison. His absence in her life was very difficult for Goldman. Convinced Goldman was involved in the plot, police raided her apartment and found no evidence, pressuring her landlord to evict her. Worse, the intended was failed to route the messes. Workers and anarchists alike condemned Bertman's actions. Johann Most, their former mentor, lashed out at Bertman and the assassination attempt. Furious at those attacks, Goldman brought a toy horsewhip to a public lecture and demanded on stage that Moore explain his betrayal. He dismissed her, whereupon she struck him with the whip, broke it on his knee, and hurled the pieces at him. She later regretted her assault, confiding to a friend, at the age of 23, one did not reason. When the Panic of 1893 struck in the following year, the United States suffered one of the worst economic crises ever. By the year's end, the unemployment rate was higher than 20%, and hunger demonstration sometime gave way to riot. Goldman began speaking to the crowd of furious men and women in New York. On June 21st, she spoke to a crowd of nearly 3,000 people in Union Square, where she encouraged unemployed workers to take immediate action. Her exact words were unclear. Undercover agent insists she ordered the crowd to take anything by force, while Goldman later recorded this message. Well then, demonstrate before the palaces of rich, demand work. If they don't give you work, demand bread. If they deny you both, take bread. Later in court, Detective Sergeant Charles Jacob offered yet another vision of her speech. A week later, she was arrested in Pennsylvania and returned to New York City for trial. Charges with inciting to riot. During the train ride, Jacobs ordered to drop the charges against her if she would inform on other radicals in the area. She responded by throwing a glass of ice water in his face. As she awaited trial. Goldman was visited by Neely Bai, a reporter from the New York World. She spent 2 hours talking to Goldman and wrote a positive article about the woman she describes as a modern Joan of Arc. Despite a positive publicity, the judge was pursued by Jacob's testimony and scared by Goldman's politics. An assistant district attorney questions Goldman's about her anarchism and as well as her atheism. The judge spoke of her as a dangerous woman. She was sentenced to 1 year in the Black Whales Island penitentiary. Once inside, she suffered an attack of hintermentium and was sent to the infirmary, where she befriended a visiting nurse and began studying medicine. She also read a dozen books. When she was released after 10 months, a rigorous crowd of nearly 3,000 people greeted her at the Theater in New York City. She soon became swamped with requests for interviews and lectures. To make money, Goldman decided to pursue the medical work she had studied in prison. However, she preferred fields of specialization, midwifery, and massage were not available to nursing students in the United States, though she sailed to Europe, lecturing London, Glasgow, and Edinburgh. She met with renowned anarchists like Errico Malatesta, Louis Mitchell, and Peter Rapolkin. In Vienna, she received 2 diplomas and put them immediately to use in the United States. Alternately between lectures and midwifery, she conducted the first cross-country tour by an anarchist speaker. In November 1899, she returned to Europe, where she met anarchist Hippolyte Harvel, with whom she went to France and helped organize the International Anarchist Congress on the outskirts of Paris. On September 6, 1908, Leon Zolkaz, an unemployed factory worker and registered Republican with a history of medical illness, shot United States President William McKinley twice during a public speaking event in Buffalo, New York. McKinley was hit in the breastbone and stomach and died 8 days later. Zolkaz was arrested and interrogated around the clock. During the interrogation, he claimed he was an anarchist and said he had been inspired to act after attending a speaking held by Goldman. The authorities used this as a pretext to charge Goldman with planning McKinley's assassination. They tracked her to a residence in Chicago she shared with Harville, as well as Mary and Addie, a anarchist couple. Goldman was arrested along with Abby, Havel, and 10 other anarchists. Earlier, Zolkaz had tried but failed to be friends with Goldman and she and her company. During a talk in Cleveland, he had approached Goldman and asked her advice on which book he should read. In July 1901, he had approached at the exact house, asking a series of unusual questions. They assumed he was a infiltrator, like a number of police agents sent to spy on radical groups. They had remained distant from him, and Abby sent a notice. Associates warning of another spy. Although Zogaz repeatedly denied Goldman's influence, the police held her in close custody, subjecting her to what she would call third degree. She explained their distrust of him, and it was clear she had not had a significant connection with him. No evidence was found linking Goldman to the attack, and she was eventually released after 2 weeks of detention before McKinley's death. Goldman offered to provide nursing care, referring to him as merely a human being. Zorgans, despite considerable evidence of medical illness, was convicted of murder and executed. Throughout her detention after her release, Goldman steadfastly refusing to condemn Zolgaz's actions, standing virtually alone in doing so. Friends and supporters, including Berman, argued her to quit his cause, but Goldman defended Zorgan as a supersensitive being and chastised other anarchists of abandoning him. She was vilified in the press and the high priestess of anarchy, while many newspapers declared the anarchist movement responsible for the murder. In the wake of this event, socialism gained support over anarchism among United States rebels. McKinley's successor, Theodore Roosevelt, declared his intent to crack down not only against anarchists, but against all active and passive sympathizers with anarchists. After Zolkaz's execution, Goldman withdrew from the world. Granted by her anarchists, vilified by the press, and separated from her love, she returned to anonymity and nursing. It was a bitter and hard to face life anew, she wrote later. Using the name E.G. Smith, she vanished from the public life and took on a series of private nursing jobs. When the United States Congress passed the Anarchist Exclusion Act, however, a new wave of anarchism rose to oppose it, carrying Goldman back into the movement. A coalition of people and organizations left across the left end of the political spectrum opposed the law on grounds that it violated freedom of speech, and she was the nation's ear once again. When an English anarchist named John Turner was arrested under the Anarchist Exclusion Act and threatened with deportation, Goldman joined forces with the freedom speech legends to champion his cause. The legend enlists the aid of Clarence Darrow and Edgar Lee Masters, who took Turner's case to the United States Supreme Court, although Turner and the legends lost. Goldman considered it a victory for propaganda. She had returned to anarchist activism, but was taking its toll on her. I never felt so weighted down, she wrote to Berman. I fear I am forever doomed to remain public property and to have my life worn out through the care of the lives of others. On 1906, Goldman decided to start publishing of her own, a part of expression for the young idealist in art of letters. Lady Earth was staffed by a cadre of radical activists, including Hubley Havel, Max Baggage and Leonard Abbott. The additional to publishing original work by its editors and anarchists around the world. Mother Earth reprinted sections of a variety of writers. Those included French publishers. Goldman wrote frequently as anarchism, about anarchism, politics, liberal issues, atheism, sexuality, and feminism. On May 18th of the same year, Alexander Berman was released from prison carrying a bouquet of roses. She told him on the platform and found herself seized by torment and pity as she beheld her gowned pale form. Neither was able to speak. They returned to their home in silence. For weeks she struggled to readjust to life on the outside. An operative speaking tour ended and failed, and in Cleveland he purchased a revolver with the intent to kill himself. He returned to New York, however, and learned that Goldman had been arrested with a group of activists meeting to reflect on Zelkis, immigrant anew by this violation of freedom of assembly. He declared, "My resurrection has come," and set about securing their release. Berman took the helm of Mother Earth in 1907, while Goldman toured the country to reach the funds to keep it functionable. Editing the magazine was a revitalizing experience for Berman. His relationship with Goldman fluttered, however, after he had an affair with a 15-year-old anarchist named Becky. Goldman was pained by the rejection of her, but considered it a consequence of his prison experience. Later in the year, she served as a delegate from the United States to the International Anarchist Congress of Amsterdam. Artists and secularists from around the world gathered to sort out the tension between the two ideologues, but no decisive agreement was reached. Goldman returned to the United States and continued speaking to loud audiences. For the next 10 years, Goldman traveled around the country nonstop, delivering lectures and agitating for anarchism. The coalition formed in opposition to the Anarchist Exclusion Act had given her an opportunity for reaching out to those of the political perversions. When the U.S. Justice Department sent spies to observe, they reported the meeting as packed. Writers, journalists, actors, judges, and workers from across the spectrum spoke of her magnetic power, her convincing purchase, her force, eloquence, and fire. In the spring of 1908, Goldman met and fell in love with Ben Reitman, the so-called hobo doctor. Having grown up in Chicago, Tenderloin District, Reitman spent several years as a drifter before attending a medical degree from the College of Fitness and Surgics of Chicago. As a doctor, he attended to people suffering from poverty and illness, particularly febrile disease. He and Goldman began an affair. They shared a commitment to free love, but whereas Reitman took a variety of lovers, Goldman did not. She tried to reconcile her feelings of jealousy with a belief in freedom of the heart, but found it difficult. 2 years later, Goldman began feeling frustrated with lecture audiences. She yearned to reach the few who really wanted to learn rather than the many who can be amused. Thus, she collected a series of speeches and items she had written for Mother Earth and published a book called Anarchism and Other Essays, covering a wide variety of topics. Goldman tried to represent the medical and spirit struggles of 21 years, in addition to an comprehensive look at anarchism and its criticism. The book included essays on patriarchism, women's suffering, marriage, and imprisonment. When Margaret Sanger, an advocate of access to contraception, coined the term birth control and disseminate information about various methods in the June 1914 issue of her magazine the women rebel. She received aggressive support from Goldman, who had really been an active in effort to increase birth control access for several years. In 1916, Goldman was arrested for giving lessons in public on how to use birth control. Sager, too, was arrested under the Comstock Law, which prohibit the dissemination of obscene, lewd, or lascivious articles, including information relating to birth control. Although they later split from Sager over charges of insufficient support, Goldman and Reitman distributed copies of Sanger's pamphlet, Family Limitations. In 1915, Goldman constructed a nationwide speed tour in part to raise awareness about contribution options. Although the nation attitude toward the subject seemed to be liberalizing, Goldman was charged with violating the Comstock Law, refusing to pay a $100 fine. Goldman spent 2 weeks in a prison work home, which she saw as an opportunity to reconnect with those rejected by society. Although United States President Woodrow Wilson was re-elected in 1916 under the slogan, "He keeps us out of the war," all the start of his second term, he decided that Germany's continued deployment of unrestricted submarine warfare was a significant cause of the United States to enter World War I. Shortly after, Congress passed the Selective Service Act of 1917, which required all males 21 through 30 to register for the military conscription. Goldman saw the decision as an exercise in materialist oppression driven by capitalism. She declared in Mother Earth her intent to resist conscription and was opposed United States involvement in the war. To this end, she and Bertman organized the No Conscription League for New York, which proclaimed, "We oppose conscription because we are internationalists, entomologists, and opposed to all war raised by capitalist governments." The group became a vanguard for anti-drift activism, and chapters began to appear in other counties. When police began raiding the group's public events to find young men who had not registered for the draft, however, Goldman and others focused on their efforts on spreading pamphlets and other written work. In the midst of the nation's patriarchs' fervor, most elements of the political left refused to support the League's efforts. The Women's Peace Party, for example, considered its opposition to the war once the United States entered it. The Socialist Party of America took an official stance against U.S. involvement, but supported Wilson in the most of his activities. In June 15, 1917, Goldman and Bergman were arrested during a raid of their officers which yelled, "A wagon led of anarchists records and propaganda for the authorities." The New York Times reported that Goldman asked to change into a more appropriate outfit and emerged in a gown of royal purple. The pair was changed with conspiracy to induce people not to register. Under the new Exploration Act, it was held on United States $25,000 bail each. Defending herself and Buckman during their trial, Goldman invoked the First Amendment, asking how the government could claim to fight for democratic in bond while suppressing free speech at home. We say that if America has entered the war to make the world a safer democratic, she must first make democratic safe for America. How else is the world to take America seriously when Democrat at home is daily being outraged, free speech suppressed, peaceable aspirants broken up by overbearing and brutal gangsters in uniform, when free press is curtailed and every independent opinion gagged? Verily, poor as we are democratic, how can we give of it into the world? However, the jury found them guilty. The judge imposed the maximum sentence, 2 years imprisonment, a $10,000 fine each, and a possible of deportation after their release from prison. As she was transferred to Missouri State Penitentiary, Goldman wrote to a friend, 3 years in prison for having made a uncompromising stand for one ideal, why that is a small price. In prison, she was also assigned to work as a seamstress under the eye of a merciful gutter sniper of a 21-year boy paid to get results. She met the scholar Cat Hare, who had also been imprisoned under the Expurable Act. Although they differ in political strategy, Cat believed in voting to achieve state power. The two women became together to agitate for better conditions among prisons. Goldman also met and became friends with Gabrielle, a anarchist and follower of Luigi Gillani. Gabriella has been imprisoned transferring a statue filled with dynamite on a Chicago-born plane. She had refused to cooperate with authorities and was sent to prison for 14 months. Working together to make life better for the other inmates, the three women became known as the Trio. Goldman was released in September 27, 1919. After Goldman and Bergman were released from prison during America's Red Scares of 1919 through 20, when public assent about wartime pro-German activities have morphed into a provocative fear of pogroms and the prospect of a commencent riot revolution. Agent General Alexander Palmer and J. Edgar Hoover, head of the United States Department of Justice General Intelligence Division, were intent to use the Anarchist Evocation Act and its 1918 expansion to deport any non-citizens they could identify and advocate of anarchy or revolution. Goldman and Bertman Hoover wrote, while they were in prison, are believed beyond doubt two of the most dangerous anarchists in this country, and returned to the community we result in undue harm. At her deportation hearing on October 27, she refused to answer questions about her beliefs on the grounds that her American citizenship invalidated any attempts to deport her under the Anarchist Expulsion Act, which could be enforced only against non-citizens of the United States. She presently wrote statements including, "Days so-called aliens are deported. Tomorrow, Native Americans we will banish. Already so, some pet writers are suggesting that Native American sons that to whom democracy is a scarce ideal should be exiled." Louis Post at the Department of Labor, which was ultimate authority over deportation decisions, demanded that the revocation of her husband, American citizen in 1908, has had revoked her as well. After initially promising a court fight, she decided not to appeal its ruling. The Labor Department included Goldman and Bertman among 249 aliens. Its deportation, mostly people who, with other vaguer associations with rebel groups who'd been swamped up in government riots in November. Bamford, a ship the press nicknamed the Silver Ark, sailed from the Army's New York post of embarkation in December 22nd. Some 58 enlistmen and 4 officers provided security on the journey, and pistols were distributed to the crew. Most of the press approved these decisions. The Cleveland Plain wrote, "It is hoped and expected that other vessels, larger, more commodious, carried similar cargo. We follow in their wake." The ship landed and charges in Hongo, Falkland on Saturday, January 7th, 1920. Upon arriving Falkland, authorities there conducted the deployees to the Russian fortment under the flag of truce. Goldman industrial viewed the Bolshevik revolution in a positive light. She wrote in Mother Earth that despite its dependence on communist government, it represented the most fundamental, far-reaching, and all-embracing principles of human freedom, all for economic well-being. By the time she reached Europe, however, she experienced fears about what was going on. She was worried about the ongoing Russian Civil War and the possibility of being seized by anti-Bolshevik forces. The state anti-capitals thought it was also pose a threat. I would never in my life work within the confines of the state, she wrote to her niece, Bolshevik or otherwise. She quickly discovered that her fears were justified. Days after returning to Petrograd, she was shocked to hear a party official refer to free speech as bourgeois superstitious. As she and Berman traveled around the country, they found repressed mismanagement and corruption. Instead of equality and worker empowerment that they had dreamed of, those who questioned the government were demonized and counter-revolutionaries, and workers labored under several conditions. They met with Vladimir Lenin, who assured them that government suppression of press, liberals of justified, he told them. There can be no free speech in a revolutionary period. Berman was more willing to forget the government's actions in the name of historical necessity, but he eventually joined Goldman in opposing the civil states. In March 1921, strikes erupted in Petrograd when workers took the streets demanding better food, rations, and more union autonomy. Goldman and Berman felt responsibility to support the strikers. Starting to remain silent now is impossible, even criminal. The unrest spread to the port town of Renstedt, where the military responded with orders, and the fighting that assured, apprehending thousand rebellious soldiers and thousand rebelling sailors and soldiers were killed, and 2,000 more were arrested. In the wake of those events, Goldman and Berman decided there is no future in this country for them. More and more, she wrote, we have come to a conclusion that we can do nothing here, and so we cannot keep up a life in inactivity much longer. We have decided to leave. In December 1921, they left the country and went to the Levant country city of Raga. The United States Commissioner in that city wired official in Washington, D.C., who began requesting information for other governments about the couple's activity. After a short trip in Stockholm, they moved to Berlin for several years. During this time, she agreed to write a series of articles about her time in Russia for Joseph Pulitzer newspaper, the New York World. These were later collected and published in a book form as My Disillusionment in Russia in 1923 and My Further Disillusion in Russia in 1924. The titles of the books were added by the publisher to be Skellington and Goldman's protection, albeit in vain. Goldman found it difficult to accommodate to the German leftist community. Communists described her outspokenness about civil repression. Liberal derided her radicalism. While Berman remained in Berlin, helping German exiles, she moved to London in September 1927. Upon her arrival, the novelist Rebecca West approached a reception dinner for her, attended by more than 200 others. When she spoke of her dissatisfaction with the civic government, the audience was shocked. Some left the gathering, others berated her for prematurely criticizing communist experiment. Later, in a letter, Russo declined to support her effect as systematic different change in the Soviet Union and ridiculed her anarchist idealism. In 1925, a spectrum of deportation loomed again by a Scottish anarchist named James Colton offered to marry her and provide British citizenship. Although they were only distant acquaintances, she agreed and they were married in June 27, 1925. Her new status gave her peace of mind and allowed her to travel to France and Canada. Living in London was stressful for Goldman. She wrote to Buckman, "I am awfully tired and so lonely and heart-struck. It is a dreadful feeling to come back here from lectures and find out a Conrad spirit. No one who cares whether one is dead or alive." She worked on analytic studios of drama, expanding on her work she had published in 1914, but the audience were off, and she never finished her second book on the subject. Goldman traveled to Canada in 1927. She just in the time to receive news of the impending execution of Italian anarchist Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vinsky in Brooklyn. Angered by the most irregularities of the case, she saw it as another travesty of justice in the U.S. She longed to join the mass demonstrations in Brooklyn. Memories of the Haymarket affair overwhelming her, combined by her isolation when she wrote, "I have my life before me to take up the cause of those killed. Now I have nothing." In 1928, she began writing her autobiography. With the support of a group of admirers who reached $4,000 for her, she secured a cottage in the French coastal city of Saint Tropez and spent 2 years recounting her life. Berkman offered sharply critical feedback, which she immediately incorporated at the pay of a strain on their relationship. Goldman intended the book Living My Life, a single volume of a price the working class could afford. Her publisher, however, released it as 2 volumes and sold together for $7.50. Goldman was furious, but unable to force a change. Due to the large part in the Great Depression, sales were sluggish. Desperate keen interest of libraries around the U.S. Critical reviews were generally enthusiastic. The New York Times, The New Yorker, and Saturday Views of Literature all listed it as #1 of the year's top non-fictional book. In 1933, Goldman received permission to lecture in the United States under the condition that she speak only about drama and her autobiography, but not current political events. She returned to New York in February 2nd, 1934, to generally positive press coverage instead of communist publishing. Soon she was surrounded by admirers and friends. Besieged with invitations to talk and interviews, her visa expired in May, and she was to Toronto in order to file another request to visit the U.S. However, this second attempt was denied. She stayed in Canada, writing articles for U.S. publishing. In February and March 1936, Buckman underwent a pair of prostate gland operations, recuperations in nice and cared for by his companions. Emmy Eckstein. He missed Goldman's 67th birthday in St. Tropez in June. She wrote in sadness, but he never read the letter. She received a call in the middle of the night that Buckman was in great disgrace. She left for Nice immediately, but when she arrived that morning, Goldman found that he had shot himself and was in a nearly comatose paralyzed. He died later that evening. In July 1936, the Spanish Civil War began after a attempted coup de grace by part of the Spanish army against the government of the Second Spanish Republic. At the same time, the Spanish anarchists fought against the native forces. Starting an anarchist revolution, Goldman was invited to Barcelona, and in an instant she wrote to her nephew, "The crushing weight that was pushing down on my heart since Sasha died left me as by magic." She was welcomed to be the CNT and FAI organizations, and for the first time in her life lived in a community run by and for anarchists. According to true anarchist principles, "In all my life," she wrote later, "I have not met with such warm hospitality, consolidation, and celebration." After touring a series of collectives in the province of Huesca, she told a group of workers, "Your revolution will destroy forever. The anarchism stands for chaos." She began editing the weekly CNT FAI information bullet and responded to English language mail. Goldman began to worry about the future of Spain's anarchism when the CNT FAI joined the coalition government in 1937. Against the core anarchist principle of abstaining from state structures and more discretionally, more repeated concession to communist forces in the name of uniting against fascism. She wrote that cooperating with communists in Spain was a denial of our comrade in Stanley concentration camps. Russia, meanwhile, refused to send weapons to anarchist forces, and disinformation captures were being waged against the anarchists across Europe and the U.S. Her faith in the movement unshaken, Goldman returned to London and as an author representative of the CNTFAI. Delivering lectures and giving interviews, Goldman interactively supported the Spanish anarcho-syndicalists. She wrote regularly for Spanish and the World, a bi-weekly newspaper focusing on the Civil War. In May 1937, however, communist-led forces attacked anarchist stronghold and broke up agrarian collectives. Newspapers in London and elsewhere accepted the timeline of events offered by the Second Spanish Republic at face value. British journalist George Orwell, presented for the crackdown, wrote, "The account of the embarrassing riot in May beat everything I had ever seen for lying." Goldman returned to Spain in September, but the CNTFAL appeared to her like people in a burnt house. Worse, anarchists and other radicals around the world refused to support their causes. The national forces declared a victory in Spain just before she returned to London. Frustrated by England's repressive atmosphere, which she called more factious than the factious, she returned to Canada in 1939. Her service in the anarchist cause in Spain were not forgotten. However, on her 70th birthday, the former Secretary Governor of the CNTFAI sent a message to her from Paris, blessing her for her contribution and named her as our spiritual mother. She called it the most beautiful tribute I have ever received. As the events preceded World War II began to unfold in Europe, Goldman reillustrated her opposition to wars waged by government. Much as I loathe Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, and Franco, she wrote to a friend, I would not support a war against them. And for the Democrats, which in the last analysis are only fascists in disgrace. She felt that Britain and France has missed their opportunity to oppose Francism, and that the coming war would only result in a new form of madness in the world. This position was vastly unpopular, and Hitler attacked the Jews communities reverberated throughout the Jewish diaspora. On Saturday, February 17, 1940, Goldman suffered a stroke. She became paralyzed on her right side. Although her hearing was not affected, she could not speak. For 3 months, she improved slightly, receiving visitors and on one occasion gesturing to her address book to signal that a friend might find friendly contacts during a trip to Mexico. She suffered another stroke on May 8th. However, and on May 14th, she died in Toronto at age 70. The United States Immigration and Naturalization Service allowed her body to be brought back to the United States. She was burned in German Waldom Cemetery in Forest Park, Illinois, in a western suburb of Chicago. Among the graves of other labor and social activities including Ben Redmond, and those included after the Haymarket Affair. The bas relief on her grave marked was created by Joe Davison. I apologize for my spelling errors in this article. It took a while, so you can understand that I'm not very good at reading, so yeah. I'll see you guys another time.